Hi, everyone. Morning. Morning. Okay. Thank you for that. I wanted a response, so thank you. So for those of you I didn't meet yesterday, I'm the Associate Director of the Canadian Film Centre's Digital Media Lab, and I'm delighted to be co-curating today with Jesse Albert, who is standing over here. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the CFC's VR production manager, Ian Twayson, who's right there. So Ian has supported us with the VR Day. Stand up, Ian, so you all know you. He's the man. Ask him about all our exhibits today. Ian has set them all up, and I suggest you all try them. So today, I'm delighted to say, is supported by Creative BC. So I would just like to invite Prem Gill to come up to the stage to say a few words. Would you like this mic or that mic? Can I use your mic? You can use my mic.
I've been behind this podium before. No one can see me. Thank you, Amy and Jesse and Jacqueline and Fran and everybody here at VIF and all the volunteers for supporting the festival once again. I've been a fan of this festival since I was in high school, so about 20 years. And it's one of my favorite times of year in Vancouver, so it's great to see so many people from other parts of North America and the world here as well. I hope you actually get to enjoy some of the city and the films as well. In terms of who Creative BC is, if you don't know who we are a nonprofit agency funded by the province of British Columbia to support the economic development of the creative industries. So that includes motion picture, digital media, music, book and magazine publishing. We have two of my colleagues are here, Erica Kumar and Jill Riley. Wave. Get to know them. If they'll be here today and can talk to you a little bit more about what we do. We manage some of the tax incentives for the province if you're producing some work up here or in visual effects or animation. We also have project development funding, and we do all kinds of interesting things. So feel free to, I'm going to volunteer them to be here and talk to you about stuff. So get to know us. We are delighted to be a sponsor of this great festival and excited for all the great things we're going to learn today. So thank you.
Thank you, Prem. Jesse, this is your segue.
Only because you don't have enough people talking to you. I'm going to make this really, really quick. First of all, thank you, everybody, for coming down. Our opening keynote, Ted Schilowitz, is... I'm really, really excited to hear from him, right? He's done TEDx talks. He works for 20th Century Fox as their futurist. And if you sit and talk with him, you will find out he literally has the coolest job in the world. The known universe, and unknown, by the way. So he's got an amazing track record that stems decades. That leads him to where he is, and I'm really, and by the way, also Chief Creative Officer of Barco Extreme. He really gets to do whatever he wants. So I'm gonna bring up Tim, who will be moderating with Ted after he gives his keynote, and I think Tim and Ted have known one another probably since they were yay big. So you can kind of give us the dirt on Ted.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Amy. So Ted is truly one of those guys that has got to do whatever he wanted his whole life. I can attest to that. He was the ace in the hole that Disney MGM Studios would call whenever they ran into a problem on a production when we were kids. And he has done some incredible things in the technology space, whether it was with AJA or the Red Camera. And he is a really fun guy to hang out with, and somebody that if you're interested in knowing the ins or outs of VR, he will sit down with you and talk with you about that one-on-one. So without any further ado, Ted, come on up and tell us what's going on in the VR world.
The double introduction is literally just too much. Like, I'm just sitting there going, how am I going to ever live up to this? It's sort of ridiculous. But here I am, and that coolest job in the world thing, I definitely know is going to catch up with me at some point. Because there are people at the movie studio that I work at that are way above my pay grade and importance grade that are asking me, how do I get your job? And I'm like, yeah, I just know that sooner or later it's gonna be a problem. But anyway, I'm here to talk. Thank you for coming this morning early and spending a little time with me and some of my crazy cohorts. And hopefully I'll make it fun and interesting. And somewhat absorbing. I'm very happy to take this in different directions and be creative on the spot and make it relevant for you. But I have some things that I'll sort of talk about that I have kind of pre-built that are things that I kind of postulate about and create theses about. So what I want to do before I sort of start with that is do a little experiment. I will play my futurist card and make my first futurist prediction of the day. I'm going to predict that we have 100% saturation in this audience of something we call smartphones. So if you have an iPhone or an Android phone or some other phone that's really not a phone anymore, take it up and hold it. Let me just see it. Let's make sure we're at 100%. Where's yours? You left it. Okay, well, you're going to need it. You're going to need it. All right, so keep those phones up, okay? Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a little experiment, and I want to see how you feel. Swap those phones with your neighbor. Just give your neighbor that new phone. Okay? Now, yeah, there's usually a reaction that happens when this happens. Now take that new phone and put it in your pocket or your purse. Are you starting to feel a little uncomfortable? Like I didn't do something to that little piece of silicon. I did something to you just now, right? Now, I've done this little gimmick, this little experiment in various size audiences, including like audiences of many thousands of people. And it's just an uproar when that happens. Now, try and hold out for a little while. Remember to take them back at some point because you will have some serious drama if you forget. But this is what I like to do to sort of set the stage. And I'm glad you're conversing and talking about it because that's kind of what happens, right? We have done something now. And this is part of what I think about. So I'm going to get the little thing here and talk to you about what I think about. So I like to talk about this thing that we are becoming or maybe have already become called the augmented human. And because I took a little piece of that technology from your world and made you do something a little different with it, it caused an emotional reaction. Some of you more intense than others. You should see it with a whole bunch of YouTube creators. They literally lose their minds when it's like, I can't be without it, right? So he's a real futurist. I'm kind of like a futurist in training, you know? But this guy, Ray Kurzweil, if you're interested in sort of absorbing and understanding stuff, he's a good one to read. He's a good one to think about. He said, we're going to be a hybrid. I think we're kind of sort of getting there. So this is sort of what I explore. So every day at the movie studio, I feel like this is going to happen to me. I feel like at some point, the studio heads are going to like come and like have handcuffs and go, all right, that's it. Like, the jig is up, buddy. Like, you really have no idea what you're doing, do you? And interestingly enough, that is actually part of the job description of someone that has to take the role of sort of being a little bit of the look around the next corner guy, the guiding light, as it were, the figure it out guy, is you kind of have to be willing to accept that you really don't know what you're doing, that you just sort of try and figure it out on your way to maybe making some good decisions. So that's kind of what happens to me a lot, at least in the back of my brain, is I'm just waiting for the day that they come with the handcuffs. But so far it hasn't happened, but it could happen at any moment. So let's stick with that sort of prison theme for a second. And as I did that experiment for the phone, I want to sort of make you think about this for a second. If any of you ended up going to prison tonight or later today, and you had to make a phone call, but they took away your smartphone, your little robot friend, the thing that has taken over some of your life. Maybe you could call like your parents' phone number when you were a kid, and maybe like one other friend. But beyond that, like if you didn't have the thing, who would you actually remember the digits to call? Because you've given up part of that autonomy. You've given up part of that part of your brain that remembered 30 or 40 phone numbers in case there was an emergency. Your robot has taken that over. Here's another example. When was the last time you drove anywhere without using navigation? Without like firing it up? Even if you knew where you were going, you want your robot friend to sort of help you guide your way, to check the traffic and do all these things. So this is part of the hybridization, right? These are the things I want you to sort of think about. I know maybe you came in thinking we were going to talk a lot about VR and AR, and maybe we'll get there at some point. But I think this is actually much more important to think about as to what is happening to us as human beings, what is happening to us as human culture that is leading us into interesting directions. I like this quote a lot. So it's from a famous movie cowboy in the United States. He was also the first mayor of Beverly Hills, which is kind of interesting. Even if you're on the right track, you will get run over if you just sit there. Do you guys believe that? Think about that? I think about that every day. Something to think about. Here's some other things to think about. This is kind of the only stuff you'll have to read in the talk. And I don't have like a little confidence monitor, so I kind of have to look up here to see what the hell I said. All right. So this is from a report back in 2013. We are now in 2016. 4 out of 5 people that use a smartphone check their phones within the first 15 minutes of waking up. I would bet now 3 years later, it's in with the first 2 to 3 minutes of waking up. Think about what you did this morning, right? So, you know, she's kind of happy. They're a little less happy. I think she's clearly unhappy about that. 80% of the people back in 2013 say it's the first thing they do in the morning is check their little robot friend. Interesting, right? Almost 80% have their phone, their smartphone, near or on them for all but 2 hours of their waking day. I'd be willing to say now, 3 years later, it's more like 15 minutes. It's when you take a shower. Is the only time that thing is not next to you. You agree? So sort of think about that. Now I want you to watch this. Maybe some people know this. Take a look at this. There's some sound here too. You want to bring up the audio if you can.
Oh, check it. Did that come out okay?
That's the best one of the 300 pictures I've taken of myself today.
Every girl in the picture is locked into her phone.
Oh, Lord.
Every single one is dialed in. Welcome to parenting in 2015. They're all just completely transfixed by the technology. David Peralta. Oh, hold on. I'd take a selfie with the hot dog. Selfie with the churro. Selfie just of a selfie.
Okay, so that's interesting, right? That went viral a couple years back, maybe a year back. I thought it was interesting. I said, I'm going to put this in my presentation because it means something to me. There's more to that story other than those baseball announcers making fun of those lovely girls from that sorority taking a bunch of selfies of themselves. Let's see if it goes to here. I think I have to get a little closer. Okay, watch the rest of the story.
And while they're maybe they'll tweet us their fan photo, BB. Now's the time, fans. Get on the Twitter with a hashtag.
That was not behavior that they just did on their own. They were asked to participate in that behavior as a corporate marketing thing, right? And then once the announcers did that, they went on to make fun of those girls. But what's interesting to me is who are those guys kidding as they're making fun of that world? They live in just as much of an augmented world as those girls they're making fun of. They're not really watching the game. They're watching an augmented version of the game on a whole bunch of monitors, and all the people in the booth and everybody on TV, we've all sort of created this augmented sense of what we think is reality. So you'll go to a baseball game or a football game, and half the time you're watching the freaking Jumbotron for the replays, right? These are the things that are worth thinking about, because it's the stuff that not a lot of people think about as to what's actually going on in the world. This is a picture from a Starbucks a couple weeks ago. As we were walking by one of the Starbucks in Vancouver, I saw this same scene play out yesterday. Look at the human behavior, right? People are not connecting like this. They are connecting like this. They are buried in their little worlds. So it's interesting as you start to think about it. Are we ready to go here next? If we've started to build the dynamic of how we use these smart tools and how powerful they become in our lives, so it is a little bit dystopian, right, what I'm talking about here? But I also think it's also amazingly utopian, right? We're kind of right in the middle of it all. You think about what can be done, what can't be done. But to me, the reason why this has a chance to succeed is because of where we sit as humans today and what we actually are doing on a daily basis. From the minute you wake up, typically as a working person in this world, you are looking at some flat panel piece of silicon until you go to bed at night. And when you entertain yourself, you're watching a big flat panel piece of silicon, or maybe a movie version like this. So the question is, and this is sort of a like raise your hand thing, because this is an interesting audience. You guys came here this morning to think about this and talk about this. Do you think we're ready to start using these now on a mass scale. Let me see. Like, are we ready as people? Are we ready as, because as I go through this a little more, we're going to talk, yes, what do I mean by ready? We're going to ask some questions about why it didn't happen before, because this is not the first time at this carousel that we've been trying to bring this sort of new forms of media, new forms of entertainment, new forms of socialization to the fore. But the reason why I'm in it is because I think that we're actually ready now, that we've been sufficiently softened as humans to understand the pros and cons of those little robot friends that we have in our pockets and that we use all day long. So that's what I think about. Okay, so let me give you a little background, because this often comes up in questions, so I actually have it in the talk. So yeah, really, that's what I do? Like, how do I get that gig, right? Like, what gives me the right to stand up here and tell you this is what I get to do all day long and like have the coolest job in the world? So I actually had to think about this. It was a question that came up in a very large audience, and I had to think about it. And as I was thinking about it, sort of answering the question, it sort of dawned on me that this is a big reason why I'm a futurist. So I call this the funnel of crazy. Everything starting up in Canada and migrating down to the United States, anything that starts as crazy sort of moves its way down, all the way down to the funnel. And when you hear a news story, in this unusual little tidbit, you're like, oh, I know where this is going. It's going right to Florida. I grew up here in Central Florida. So when I was a kid, moved there at 6.5, this was my world. It was sort of racist. It was backwoods. It was actually kind of scary. It wasn't really the most comfortable, nurturing place for a little Jewish kid from Brooklyn. This was what it looked like. Literally the next year of my life, when I was 7.5, it turned into this. Right in front of my eyes. So I literally lived in the future from the time I was a little kid. This was my world. Like, this was it in the 70s and 80s, right? And I grew up and I worked through Disney, and when Tim and I get up and chat a little bit, this was our life together. All of these things, right? I lived in the world of tomorrow. I understood it. It was core to my understanding that change is going to happen and continue to happen. My uncle worked for NASA. I got to see all the rockets go up. I lived in the future. And I sort of, as I kind of moved through my life, I sort of ended up kind of working on futuristic stuff. I was lucky to work with a bunch of teams to help build things that are somewhat transformative in the industry and continue to be transformative. And that's when my friends at Fox, after I retired from this movie camera company that I helped get going, they said, come help us figure that out again, but in a broader way. So that's a little background on me, very short. We can talk more about that if you're interested, but I just sort of that's the why. That's the why I get to be a futurist, at least from my brain. Which kind of leads me to the dynamic of what I do is just essentially way better than a real job. I don't really have a real job, I just have this job. I just goof around and help guide things and help move things in directions that might be important. I live in the world of what if. I live in the world of the might. And I think about theme parks probably more often than I really should be. But we'll talk about that and the relevance of that as it comes to VR and AR as we move through this a little bit. This is some of the collection of my daily pictures. You might recognize some of the big directors and producers. These aren't like pictures I downloaded from Google Photos. This is like my daily life. I show this stuff off. I wear these headsets 4 or 5, sometimes 6, 7 hours a day. Like, my whole day is no longer looking at an iPhone or a laptop screen or a TV screen. It's wearing this stuff. And I know I'm an edge case, but I have a believability that, number one, a lot's going to change in this world. And this is a direction that I think the world is actually going to head now. So here's some more photos. I take them on airplanes, which are quite hysterical stories of when I have one on an airplane and I'm watching a movie and then someone taps me on the shoulder and just goes, excuse me, what is that thing? And then I pass it around on the plane, and before you know it, everybody's using it and learning about it. So you just become kind of a de facto evangelist if you're on the early side of a curve of this kind of technology. So these are just some pictures of sort of where my daily life lives. There's a few more. So you get some stuff. We'll talk a little bit about some of the first projects that we did in a minute. But that gives you a general idea of, literally, that's my day-to-day, which is different than probably your day-to-day. But it might start to converge into your day-to-day pretty damn soon. This is an interesting area to talk about. I think about this a lot, and I'm curious if you guys will relate or feel this a little bit. I believe this is the first mainstream touch on what we refer to as virtual reality. You guys all remember the Wii? You used the Wii? So the Wii is a different kind of entertainment because the Wii wasn't thinking about making games. They were thinking about making simulations for the home. So your grandma could bowl in the living room. She's not playing a game, she's bowling. You could play tennis. You could go skiing. You could do things, and you used your brain and your believability structure that if you got a big screen in front of you, that this was virtual entertainment. You were starting to do it. Do you guys remember how much fun this was? Like when you go home tonight, you might be like, oh, we should fire up the Wii again. It was really fun, right? The best understanding of why this was virtual reality to me was until they realized that they needed to put safety straps on the Wiimotes. People would get so into it, they would get so virtualized that they would throw the remote, if they were playing baseball or doing boxing, and it would bounce in their TV and crack their TV and break their TV. And it was actually a thing. And people had to figure it out. They're like, the Nintendo folks were like, we better put a safety strap on that thing. And that's a real story, right? So that's the thing I think about. That's something you should think about as to why this is going to be popular. Because as we advance our world of simulations, we are building more and more technically viable, educationally viable, virally, emotionally connected simulations. Now remember where I grew up. I grew up in the world of theme parks. Think about that for a minute. Here's the first turn at the wheel. So let's see, what does that say? That's May of 1995. VR goes mass market. Well, that didn't quite happen, did it? I mean, you look at some of these things. These are interesting, right? So there was a feeling 2 generations ago now, in the time frame, that something was going to happen within this world of simulation. But the reasons why it didn't, and most people think it's because the technology was too expensive, it was too clunky, the computers weren't ready yet. Wasn't ready. What people don't think about is, were we ready as people in the mid-90s? And my thesis is no, which is why it didn't quite catch. But there were attempts. Now I want to show you why I think it caught. If you want to bring the lights down a little bit, there's a couple little videos I'll show you really quickly here. With anybody's sort of life in moving through their journey of life, there are kind of these all-in moments, right? Where you just have that moment that happens to you and you're like, that was before and that was after. In the early days when I was starting, 3 years ago, when I was starting to mess around with all this new technology stuff at Fox, I got invited to this small group of developers that were working literally in their basement, like in their boxer shorts at 2 in the afternoon, they wake up, and they were building some really interesting stuff. I went and saw it. I was really impressed with it. And I thought, I want to bring my son over here. At the time he was 15, he's 18 now, and let him try it. You're going to see how primitive this is, but it's an interesting sort of tell point, and then I'll tell you the rest of the story in a minute. Just watch this for a minute. So Matthew, can you hear me?
Yep.
What do you think about this experience?
I like it. I like it a lot.
Did you look up in the sky yet? That you can see the sky?
Hold on.
Okay. He's busy killing zombies. Killing zombies is a very popular metaphor, by the way. It's used over and over.
Sky's cool.
Oh, get him. Axe him. Axe him. Oh, yeah. Get closer. Oh, nice. So it's a little bit like the Wii on steroids now, right? Same kind of experience. You're building a simulation. Here's what happened to me and what happened to him. He played that for about 10 minutes, and I'll never forget what happened. He lifted the headset off. He looked at me. His eyes were wide as saucers, and the words that came out of his mouth were, "Dad?" He's like, "What?" "I'm never playing my Xbox again." Thing went right back on. And that was my all-in moment. I'm like, this is going to happen. We're going to do this. I still get chills when I say it because I felt it. And this was insanely primitive at the time. These guys had hacked this thing together with a PlayStation ball and a backpack computer and all this stuff. But this kind of stuff is evolving. Like, this was the beginnings for me. There's a couple of other interesting ones that I think are worth looking at very quickly. This is an interesting challenge that we have. Kids this young should not be doing this, but trust me, they are going to. So we're going to have to figure this out.
Wow. Is it space? what's in it?
I see planets.
Do you see stars?
Yes. Mommy?
Yeah, Cal. Are you really in space?
Yes, I am.
Is it like you imagined it would be?
Yes. Mommy, what are you doing?
I'm here on Earth. I'm not in space.
I'm on Earth.
Yeah.
What do you see?
I think I see stars.
Can you look up?
Wow.
So it's that genuine wow that is ageless, that people from, and I'll show you this next piece of the puzzle, which is interesting, from the youngest all the way to the oldest have this wow moment. And this technology, just within 2.5 years, has migrated what I would call 7 generations of technology in just a couple of years. This is insanely primitive to where we are and what we're using today. And insanely primitive to the things that I'm actually seeing in the secret parts of our world that are actually coming, that are really going to be big agents of change. Here's another one. It's kind of interesting. Okay, I'll just show you a second of this one.
This is going on YouTube.
One if you
Man.
caught this one.
Siti, what do you think?
It's so real, and it's a picture in here, huh?
Yeah,
Oh, Lordy.
that's pretty cool, right?
It sure is. And you know what? Is it my eyes or are the leaves blowing in
They're
the wind?
blowing. You're right. You see it.
Oh, man.
How cool is that?
Do you want to see the ocean?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, so this goes on for a while, and she continues to lose her mind over and over and over again, and it's unbelievably charming. It's worth looking at. Those are interesting touch points for me, and I've got hundreds and hundreds of them now, probably thousands. You saw those pictures. Big directors, big producers, people from the industry, all trying to figure this out, all trying to see, is there a there, right? Which is interesting. I'm going to touch briefly on a couple of the projects that we've worked on, and then maybe, Tim, you and I will kind of get into a little bit of a discussion on some of the topics that you guys want to talk about. I've got plenty more things to go through here, and we can jump back into some of this. If you guys want to talk about augmented reality, I can talk about that, and we can go in any direction you want. But I just wanted to give you sort of a base of what I think about all day long. So this was the first project we did at 20th Century Fox. We did it with 2 relatively big movie stars, and it became somewhat transformative. It was a 360 video experience with a group called Felix and Paul. And I would be one of the biggest sort of self-critic about when we did this in the moment in time a couple of years ago. It was really massively important. And now I question some of the logic on, is this really actually even virtual reality? Is it an interesting part of what I'd call circular entertainment, but it hasn't really connected the dots? And I'm one of the guys that helped build it, so I'd be the first to tell you, I think about that. I think about what makes it VR, and we can talk about that if you guys want in some of the Q&A. The next thing we did was much more ambitious. It's based on this book, which I presume some of you read the book or hopefully seen the movie by Ridley Scott. And our next sort of swing at the bat, we kind of really went for it. And part of that understanding of the dynamic of, should it be a simulation? Should we actually try and make people feel like they went to Mars, a place that was a little hard to go to in reality right now, although Elon's working on it, right? So when you saw those earlier videos, now we're literally just going to flash forward like 2 years later, and you'll see how much more advanced it is. So this is a little clip of one of the many news stories that came out, and I just took a little section of it because it's a good way to show you where we sort of sit today with this world. So we can pull the lights down and take a look at this. That's one of the places I work.
So I'm not supposed to be doing anything right now, right?
Cool.
I'm going to give you controllers. Oh, sorry. That is so freaky, and by that I mean awesome.
Oh my god! Ah, this is so cool! I'm in a spacesuit! Whoa! Mom, I'm Matt Damon!
I'm really bad at this.
Oh! Oh, hi.
This is the most awesome thing that's ever happened to me.
Glad you liked it.
That was amazing. That was amazing.
That's it. How was it?
Wow. Wow.
So that's kind of interesting, right? And clever and fun. So we'll take a little pause moment here. We'll put them at the starting gate. Maybe that way. Magic. There we go. So you see just in a couple of years how much more advanced and commercialized and consumerized that product has gotten. That's the Oculus. There's also the Vive. There's the Sony that's getting ready to come out. And there's the Gear VR, which is now, sort of out there in the beginnings of what we'd call mass scale. It's in the millions. You're like seeing national ad campaigns for it on television. Some really, really refined stuff happening. So there's some muscle behind this stuff, right? There's some juice behind it. And that piece is interesting, that little video, because you get a sense of the glee and the joy, and you notice that we're kind of building a theme park simulation, right? But we're taking it to scale. We're allowing it to go into everybody's living room or into the train ride that they take in the morning. So I've often sort of referred to virtual reality as you get to wear a theme park on your face, and you get to take it with you. And who doesn't like to go to theme parks, right? Because it's fun. And you understand this idea of spatial entertainment. So this, now I'll just kind of open it up, and I've got a little more here to talk about that kind of goes into the other part of this equation, and I'll leave it up to you guys. I could spend a little bit of time talking about the other side of the other side of the puzzle, which is called augmented or mixed reality, for a few minutes, or we could take a pause here and do some Q&A casually and then dive into that. I'm not sure where we sit on time, so Amy, I'll leave it up to you. Tim, what do you want to do, since I'm going to go a little bit more and give you the AR stuff, and then? All right. Okay. And if you guys are frustrated, you can go outside in the rain. I don't know, whatever. All right. This is where I think we sit today. I got in a lot of trouble for this. I won't tell you why, but afterwards, if we're having a coffee together, I'll tell you why I got a lot of trouble for this. I believe that right now, we are in the brick cell phone days of VR. By the way, remember to take your phones back, if you haven't, from the beginning of our little talk here, or you will be very frustrated with me and others later. So remember to get your robot back so you can live your life again. But this is going to change, right? We, in our loving little industry, refer to the devices we use as the face huggers or the face suckers. That will not be the future of this medium. That is the today of this medium. And you can ask anybody that works in the medium, including those that are spending hundreds and hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to create the devices that we have today. They will tell you that this is a moment in time. Just like it doesn't take all that long to remember the last time you used a CRT monitor on your desk, a big giant box, or a big CRT television, and now there are these flat panels. And now this is like the CRT sort of days, right? But it's going to change, and it's going to change. And it doesn't mean by any chance of the imagination this is not a criticism. These are remarkable devices. The fact that they work and they're mobile and they're powerful and we can use them everywhere, but it's just the beginning. So this kind of looks interesting. Maybe. Remember this? Google Glass? Okay. The reason why I believe it's not interesting is because of something I refer to as the CF. The CF simply stands for... It's funny with the Q thing. It's not working well. Wow, magic. Stands for, come on, baby, the creepiness factor. It's the same reason why people that wear Bluetooth headsets all day long are fucking creepy. Like, what is that thing in your head, in your face, that you have to, you can't miss that call? It's so important. It's one thing if you're sitting at your desk or you got a long conference call and you want to put a headset in. But there are people that wear these all day long, right? The last cool person that wore a Bluetooth headset, in my mind, that actually looked kind of sexy and interesting, was Lieutenant Uhura from Star Trek. That was the last human being on the planet, right? So these things are problematic because of the way they were created and what they were thinking about. It is very much a what were you thinking sort of logic. But it's also a telling sign. Sometimes when you get stuff wrong, you're on your way to getting it right, right? So you would hear me argue in the most interesting way that almost everything we're doing about VR today drifts a little more to the wrong than right. But eventually we're going to get it so right that you won't even think about the days that you used to use that little piece of silicon and you're holding it in your hands. It'll just go away. It's just not even a relevant thing, just like those big CRT monitors. So if you look at where that means, what that means, there's our funny Bluetooth headset, folks. Same idea, right? Same problem. We might be heading here. So there's the HoloLens. This is something called ODG that we're involved in. There's Meta. This is something from Epson. This is mixed reality. You notice that they're starting to look more like eyewear, but very primitive. The stuff that's being worked on now in the labs, there's a really interesting group in Florida doing some stuff, this group in San Francisco doing some stuff, is starting to look like something you might actually wear for hours and hours on end. You know, if you wear glasses, you might go here. So watch this really quick, and then this is a good stopping point. This is from my friends down in Magic Lab. Okay, now watch this one. So that's a simulation, and a lot of people were questioning me, like, that's not like real, right? That's not really what it's going to be. And I tell them, no, that's real. Like, that's really happening. And then a few months later, they kind of gave people a little sneak peek through the tech. And you know, because of my NDAs, I'm not allowed to tell you anything more than what is out there publicly, but this is out there publicly. So it's a YouTube thing you can find. This is real. So if you think that's cool, trust me, you ain't seen nothing yet. The stuff that I've been seeing in the labs that we're doing with this group in San Francisco and down in Florida are completely mind-blowing and start to build a future that really starts to break the boundaries of what we consider entertainment and socialization and operating systems for our computers and the way we interact with the world. So this is probably a good stopping point, and then we can chat a little bit. I'm not sure what the next slide is, but we'll go from there. Oh, there you go. That's a good one to be up there, because if you reflect on the past, you kind of see the future, right? We've been looking at immersive entertainment for a damn long time, if you remember the original Nickelodeons and what they did.
So that was really good. That was really good. So when was the first time you saw VR? Was it the Aladdin Magic Carpet ride back in the 90s at Epcot?
So there was it was at Disney Quest. There was an experimental sort of theme park of the future at Disney when we were kids called Disney Quest. It didn't catch on for a number of reasons, mostly because they couldn't quite figure out the throughput and the human dynamics. But they did an early experiment, and they created an Aladdin Magic Carpet ride when the movie Aladdin was popular. And the headset was about 12 pounds. It was basically it was the size of a bowling ball. It had to be counterbalanced because you were using two high-res CRT monitors that sort of ran this thing. For anybody that knows computers, it ran on something called an SGI Onyx, which is $1 million computer. So every device was about $500,000 in head-mounted hardware and $1 million computer. You can understand where the challenge with scales. But it was remarkable, because and they built like a sawhorse that moved like a theme park ride, like the motion chair in The Martian.
It's kind of like a motorcycle.
Yeah.
You felt like you were on a motorcycle with this
You
helmet.
felt like you were flying the magic carpet.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
So you've written, you've directed, you've produced a lot of things over the years. There are filmmakers here. How many people would consider themselves video game creators in this room? Okay, there's a couple,
Just a couple
here.
yeah.
So the rest of the folks here are more in live action type stuff. So as a live action creator, where should you be paying attention to right now? Because as a video game creator, there's no question in my mind, this is golden. This is going to take off. But from a live action standpoint, I'm skeptical. Why should I make anything or try to make anything? To me, it feels like I would be making a feature film on VHS because the technology is not there yet.
Yeah. So I would say I'm in partial agreement with you. I'm semi-skeptical about what we refer to as live action 360 cinematography and where that needs to go to start to break down the code. But before we even go there, let's take one step back. And to me, there's a pretty interesting core understanding of the fact that gaming and game technology and game-like storytelling and traditional narrative storytelling are actually merging together in a form and a formulation, and the ability to create a simulation world using VR gives us the best chance to actually feel like we can create narrative that is much more emboldened with the idea of placing interactivity and passive entertainment and finding that sort of vein of success. So I believe that's happening. I think, like, just here at the conference, if you go upstairs, you can see Jon Favreau's piece that Weaver did, and I'm good friends with the Weaver guys. And you're kind of like in this, the best way I describe it, like this Keebler Elf world, and you get to roam around and experience things, and there's a story that's building in your mind, and it's interesting. But it feels more like a game than a narrative. When it comes to live action, a big belief structure of mine is that the tool sets for live action cinematography and virtual reality and augmented reality need to change and are changing. So I refer to sort of, and this gets a little hypercritical, because I'm genuinely a fan of anybody that's doing anything in the space and trying to push the envelope forward. We are essentially using black and white cameras when the world has moved on to color. The kind of cameras and the kind of camera technology we use today to shoot a 360 spherical video where you can look around but you're tacked in space doesn't complete the illusion. So we're all magicians, right? And the trickery is not good enough. We become so sophisticated that it's interesting and it's valuable, and documentaries in VR are really valuable. There's a valuable form of the art. But until we get to the tools that actually allow what I would call spatial or volumetric cinematography, which is a very, very hard chasm to cross, the order of the day will likely be things will drift more into the CGI world where you can create a spatial universe that you can move around and be a part of. I'm involved with some companies, and we are involved with a lot of things on the Fox side to look at what volumetric capture means. So I'll give you a sort of a physical example. In the world of movie making, and I was shooting a movie and you're here, right? If I leaned into you, this wouldn't happen. You wouldn't physically get closer to me. If I stood up, and I'm wearing a headset now, and walking around to see the alien that's parked on your back, I can't do that with a 360 camera. But I can do that with spatial technology, with spatial advanced scanning, with things that actually create volume. And the really interesting thing, and this is maybe core, like a good takeaway that I think a lot of people, it's worth absorbing, is the fundamental difference between VR and AR and any other kind of media that's come before it, is this is the first truly spatial medium. So 3D is a fake optical illusion of spatial, like you get a little bit of depth. But virtual reality is actually spatial. Like you can walk around things, you can interact with things, you can move things at your will like you would do in the real world, and that's why it's referred to as virtual reality. The closer our tool sets, whether that's CG or live action, get to that dream, the more the reality of this medium as a successful medium will happen. So you're right that gaming and game-like technology is coming first because the technology is there to do that. Live action needs to catch up, but we're working on it. We're not standing in place.
So as a live action person and thinking about live action, what are some of the mistakes that you're seeing people make over and over and over? You know, because I run into people like, oh, I have this feature film idea, but I'm thinking about doing it in VR. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, I mean, you're heading into the answer to the question, right? When I meet with people, which we meet a lot looking at projects and stuff, the first thing I ask them is, why does this matter in virtual reality? Why do you care about doing this in this medium rather than a medium that is much more evolved and much more aware and has a potential much wider audience right now? Why is it so important for you to do it in VR? And typically they don't really have a good answer.
Well, I had a meeting with you.
Yeah, that's sort of the answer. But every once in a while, someone gets the spatial sense. They're like, because I want to move people through something. I want them to feel engaged in a different way than passive entertainment. It also brings up an interesting talking point you and I were chatting about at dinner, which I've talked to a number of times. You guys have heard this term called agency in VR. People refer to it a lot, like the ability to interact with things. We call it agency. The Wii is agency, right? You have a tennis racket. You're bouncing the virtual ball around. That's agency. If I think about the audience dynamics of who likes passive entertainment versus who likes active entertainment, it's a really interesting thing. There could be some people that would challenge me on this, but it's an interesting thing that I think about. As young kids growing up in the world, you are not asked to make a lot of decisions throughout the day. The decisions are made for you. You wake up, your mom makes you breakfast, you go to school, they're force-feeding you this education track, unless you have a wonderful, remarkable teacher that lets you find your own path, which is the rarity, which is the edge case. You are essentially asked to be in the back seat of the car. You're not in the front seat of the car. The teacher's in the front seat of the car, right? Delivering you the message. And all day long, until you get home at night and your mom makes you dinner, and your choice for dinner is either you eat it or you go to your room, right? You don't get to like make your own dinner. Maybe you do, but most people don't. So you don't have a lot of agency during the day. So why do kids gravitate toward what we call video game entertainment or interactive entertainment? It's because at the end of the day, they're yearning for agency. They're yearning to actually be a master of their own domain. They want to do stuff that they can control their world. Now flip the equation. As we get older, we have to make a lot of decisions from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to work, and people are asking us to make decisions and make judgment calls and figure things out. By the end of that normal day, your brain actually wants to turn off that part. You don't want to activate. You just want to sit down and let somebody else tell you a story, right? So this is why I believe passive entertainment is actually generational. Now, what's going to be interesting is watching those kids that have grown up in the world of video games every single day. Like their evenings are about active decision-making entertainment. They want to push buttons, move around, and do things, and whether that's killing things or whatever it is. But they like to make decisions. As they grow into adults, what's going to happen to their forms of entertainment? And is VR the right tool for them? I think it might be. I think it might be the place where they get the passive sense of relaxation and let somebody else tell you story elements, but they can also engage when they're ready to engage in that story, in their own time, in their own pace. I'd be curious to see if you guys agree or disagree or violently disagree with that theory, but it's something that I think is going to be part of the success case of the generational gaps.
One of the things that jumps out to me in live action VR that is a great experience is when you get to go someplace you couldn't normally go. And for me, that was a demo that I saw of NBC's The Voice, where I put on the headset and I'm looking at an audience and I'm like, why am I looking at an audience? And then all of a sudden I hear a band playing behind me and my chair spins around and I realize I'm sitting in one of the judges' chair. And I look over and the other judges, the celebrity judges, are sitting next to me. And I was like, wow, this is a really cool experience. It's taken me places. And what's happening with live action, sporting events? Are we going to be able to buy a seat next to Jack Nicholson at a Lakers game? Are we going to be able to, go someplace on a football field that we couldn't go to?
So the answer is yes. I mean, this is a very popular area of discussion about some of the power of virtual reality and virtual experiences, right? I want to go to that premium seat, the $2,500 seat, the courtside seat. And how many times can I sell that courtside seat? The technology has to get a lot better for how we visualize that, which is something we're working on. But at some point, there will be no pixels. It will look so good. And if you kind of look, put your real future glasses on, at some point, the technology of the simulation will get so good and so real that your brain will find it hard to actually separate and understand, is it really happening to you or not? So these are things that relate to all that, But sporting events are definitely starting to happen. We're doing a lot of stuff on the Fox Sports side with VR and trying things, experimenting with things.
And then you look at the Pokemon phenomenon with AR, and I think about public places and how crowded they got during that whole mania. Do you think that's going to have a creep factor to it, to where you go to a public park and all of a sudden somebody's wearing sunglasses and they're like,
Well, yeah, it's already happening, right, with their phones, right? And that's an interesting sort of telling of where that's essentially the whole postulation of this thing I call the augmented human, right? It went to scale when they connected the dots. They used the mapping technology that was out there for a long time. They connected it to a very popular piece of IP. They marketed it just right, and it caught, and it continues to catch. What's interesting is that a lot of people don't realize that has actually caught at a mass scale well before the Pokemon phenomenon. There's a thing called geocaching. Does anybody know what geocaching is? A lot of people are nodding your head because you've probably done it. Millions and millions of people around the world use a phone to basically geolocate themselves And basically, it's a worldwide scavenger hunt, which is what Pokemon is, right? Pokemon just put a marketing gloss on geocaching. And good on them. I mean, I spent some time with the guys. They're terrific. It's really smart what they did. But it's not the first time it's been done. They actually did a project called Egress before that, which sort of caught on, but it was a little too complex for a lot of people. But essentially, people like this kind of entertainment. Now, go back to what I said before about the spatial part of it, right? So if you think about the power of Pokemon or the power of geocaching, you're not sitting in a chair watching a screen. You are out in the real world where you actually have to navigate physical space. And that's a kind of entertainment that's really intriguing. Now go back to the initial postulation of where does that exist a lot? It exists in theme park entertainment. So if you probably think, who was the most innovative guy when it comes to entertainment, it was Walt Disney. I mean, Walt Disney saw this kind of screen experience and he was like, I can break out of this screen. I can make entertainment for people that doesn't have to live on a single plane of existence. I can take them places. I can take you walk through Main Street, and then you go to Adventureland, and you go to Frontierland, and you go to Tomorrowland, and you go on rides. And if you've ever been to Disneyland or any theme park, and you do something, as wonderfully historical as A Small World, you go on a boat ride, and you're moving through space. It's extremely tied to virtual reality, where you actually, in many cases, when you're in virtual reality, you are navigating through what we would call physical space. It's virtual, right? It's artificial. But it's no different than a theme park simulation. So the more you understand that, the more successful you can be in the medium, I believe.
So we have some microphones out there. I think this would be a good time for some questions right here in the middle. You got a mic coming your way. In theory.
Yeah, we got you.
Basically, is there anyone solving the biggest problem in VR right now, which is the moment I put it on, I may want to puke?
Yes.
Is there anyone solving the problem, the puke factor?
Yes. That is what I would simply refer to as good craftsmanship in the medium. It has been largely solved. Not everyone has the same threshold for motion sickness, right? So simulator sickness is what it is, where your body and your brain and the physicality don't line up. But good, well-crafted experiences completely eliminate it. The Vive eliminates it technology-wise using something called room scale technology, where they put 2 laser trackers and they track you in the environment, virtual theme park. The Oculus does it with a camera. It is most definitely part of, as you're creating important experiences, you have to think about it. You have to think about what's your environment, how you're gonna, if you're gonna move people around, how do you move people around? And there are a lot of smart people. There's my friend Denny is in this audience. He's done some great things with how you transport and how you start to learn the rules of the road. When we built The Martian, we have a rover, like your Drive the Rover experience, right? And we had to do a lot of stuff with covering up with dirt on the lower part of the rover glass to sort of fool your brain into the fact that that part of the horizon you won't look at. You sort of see it through this muddy sort of covering. And we put you inside the spatial device of the Mars rover so that your brain starts to believe it's happening to you because you feel like you're inside something. And that mitigates or eliminates the motion sickness. There's also ratings, comfort ratings for different experiences. Some that are just, if you're highly tolerant to this, you can do this thing. And there's a lot of game-style experiences that are fine. And they'll put a rating, a motion rating. And I think that's actually really important from an industry standpoint to let people know this has easy comfort. You're not going to move around in it. You will walk around in it, but you're not going to be taken on a journey here. Versus the other stuff.
early days right now, and there are good drugs and bad drugs, and so ask somebody that watched it before you and experienced it, how was it? And if they say, "Woo, I was woozy," then maybe you stay away from that. But if they're like, "Hey, it's pretty good," and I normally get a little woozy, great, do it. So
the other thing is that the rules of the road, when people sort of say there are rules to VR, I completely call bullshit on that. I don't think there's anything other than like understanding where those comfort dynamics should be. And can you do cuts in VR? Yes, you 100% can. Can you transport people around? Can you do all the tricks that we've used for cinema magic and apply them into VR? Yes, you can. Like, don't be afraid to try. Doesn't mean that they'll work. You might have to back off them. But I hate when people sort of say, well, you can't do cuts in VR. You can't move around. You can't do this and that. just think it's nonsense.
Yeah. Yes, sir. We got a mic that doesn't work. Go ahead and give us your question.
Can everybody hear him?
I'll repeat the question. Go ahead and ask.
Yeah, sure.
Did a talk about VR, and he spoke about independent. He's Neil Stephenson, guy who wrote Snow Crash. All about, everybody knows. He talked about indie producers creating content with ideas and things that we haven't seen yet. Can you talk a little bit about, if you're not under NDA, about some of those things that are like those indie producers who are doing things that no one has talked about here? Any of the people who are really engrossed in VR and who have been around doing roaming stuff since like 3-4 years ago, would like to know some of your experience about what's really happening in that regard.
Yeah. Do you see his shirt, what he's wearing?
No. What is your shirt? Can't see it.
Disneyland.
Oh, you got a Disneyland shirt on. Nice. Welcome to the club. Second part of the question is, what have I seen that I can't tell you about is a really interesting question. I'll talk in broad strokes. I will tell you that everything I've seen that is out on the market today is just scratching the surface on what the possibilities of this medium can be in the future. I have played things and done things where I am in a real environment like this movie theater, and this movie theater would literally come to life in front of me. There would be aliens sitting in all the empty chairs, and I would have to choose what I would do with them. But it would be insanely comfortable because I'm still in my real environment to do it. So I've done experiences like that. I've seen things where characters can move in and out of real spaces. I would certainly just recommend that you go online and just Google all the Magic Leap demos that have been released. They put a few things out. There's a Star Wars C-3PO thing that they threw out there, and people continue to ask me no, that's not even close to actually real. And I'm like, no, it's totally real. I've been there, I've seen it, it's happening, it's real. And if you're interested in those kind of mediums, find a way to either work for those companies or build content for working with companies that are doing that kind of stuff, and it'll be a wonderful ride for you, I think. Does that sort of answer the question a little bit? Okay. Oh, Wild, right. Yeah. So it's an interesting one because, and it's nuanced, right? This may be something we'd have to discuss later in more depth. But there was some wonderment about what we did with the Wild piece, which is in Gear VR. You can download it and watch it, where Reese Witherspoon and Laura Dern are there, and we literally sort of take a scene from the movie. The biggest challenge that I have is that if I leaned in like I would want to when Reese is sitting with her big giant backpack on, and the illusion gets broken when I lean in and it doesn't do what it would do in the real world. She doesn't physically get closer to me. So I just yearn for that. I want that to happen. I wouldn't say that it discounts how powerful it was or where the story was at the time in terms of the technology. I'm just one that tries to, stimulate and maybe what we call force the hand of people creating the technology to continue to work harder, to continue to solve these problems so that if I really want it to feel real, it's got to have a true spatial sense. I have to be able to get up and around it. And any of these artists, like if you talk to Felix and Paul or Chris Melk or any of the folks that we're working with and many other people are working with, they're all yearning for that too. None of them would say that this is the place they want to end. This is just the beginning. So I guess that's where the criticism comes from. So it's more of a positive, we got to keep at it.
So our last question. Yes, sir.
Check. I was talking with my wife about, I said to her, I'm signing up for the VR. And she has no clue what it is. She has seen pictures, and she was saying to me, she was like, well, our kids, I bring them out into the forest, and they experience the trees, and they experience the nature, and I guess their imagination and their sense of, presence is there because they are present. And I guess her question was, that I couldn't answer, is what's the purpose? What's the purpose of simulating something like the wild, the whatever, something that's real when you can actually
really
experience something real. Like, is it a distraction for my kids? Like, is it something that it could lead them to not believe? I'm just curious because I'm going to get drilled when I'm at home.
Think about the early days of HD television. There was no programming yet, and you just saw these beauty scenes everywhere, right? Every time you saw a demo of an HD TV, it was, oh, here's a beautiful mountain, and here's a beautiful forest. Spectacle always comes first in entertainment technology, then story. And so we're kind of in that space now where there's a lot of spectacle out there and the story hasn't been developed. I mean, have you seen a live action story, that narrative that works yet?
Yeah, I've seen everything and I see more than most. And I would say that in every vein of what we refer to as VR or mixed reality or these next gen sort of simulations, I've seen massively successful deliverables on the art form. But to sort of get to your question, which is an interesting question, right? Well, we watch TV because we want to escape. We go to movies because we want to escape. And the power of the simulation can get so valuable and so strong that you instantly get into ethical questions. And the dystopian or utopian version, I tend to be an optimist, so I tend to find that humanity finds a way. And I'll give examples of, absolutely, I want my kids to go out in nature. My son is a nature kid, so he plays in VR, but he hiked the Pacific Crest Trail this summer, 700 miles, right? That's real, right? But he still loves to play video games, and now he loves VR. So he's playing both sides of the equation. If I was going to want to take a group of children to the Great Wall of China, and it was an inner city school, and we didn't have the funding, and it was like, how are we gonna, well, maybe we'll sell some candles and we'll do our best and try and figure out a way to get, a couple grand for each kid to go to China. Okay, well, that's a valuable aspiration, and that happens. But if I can offer another path to a teacher, and I can say, today we have the ability to take your students into an educational experience where we can walk the Great Wall of China. And we will literally take them there today in their classroom. They're just gonna show up in their classroom, and they're gonna put on some technology, and we're gonna take them there. And then we can take them back into history to teach them what happened when the Huns attacked and tried to get over the wall and all the things. And we can create those simulations. So do I not want kids to really go if they have a chance? Of course I do. But the many that can't, the ability to open their eyes, which is, of course, what television and movies and documentaries have done for their whole existence, right, is create the ability to go places and learn things without really having the ability to go there. So like if I want to take a trip to the Antarctic, that's a hard thing to do, right? But I can take you there in VR. There's a wonderful VR experience that's been created about Everest, and they used photorealistic, what's called photogrammetry and CG and mix it together. And you have a sense that you're actually feeling like you can climb Everest. So
it's in
there's
a
small
walk-in
amount
cooler. They have a walk-in freezer.
Right.
No.
But you have a sense that, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I tend to think it's a good thing, but I grew up in the world of theme parks where it was a valuable part of my life. It didn't completely eliminate the reality of coming to a festival like this and talking to you in person. But what's really interesting is I've done this in VR. I've done a talk show in VR. I've literally sat with 50 avatars in a room, and they've come up to me, and it's just as real as the real thing, except it's not really real. I've done karaoke in VR, which is just as creepy and terrifying as real karaoke. And you're in a karaoke bar, right? So the simulations get interesting, but I don't think it discounts reality at all. I think it's just a new version of how we entertain and learn and socialize and execute our lives.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you very much, Ted.
Thanks, everyone. It was fun.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Jesse. He's going to be introducing our next session. You got a mic? Okay. Hello, Tim.
I always wanted to be Tim Street, so I'll be Tim Street.
I'm Ted.
Oh, I want to be Ted. I think we all want to be Ted at this point.
tonight when I go out and drink, I'm going to be Ted Schilowitz.
Great, thank you.
I don't know what to say other than holy shit, right? That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Ted. And it's a hard act to follow. So, first of all, my name is Jesse Albert. I don't get a card because I'm literally coming on at the last second here to moderate. I should really be sitting between these two gentlemen.
Do you want to switch?
No. You will crush me.
Baby.
This is what I'm just warning you now. This is what it's gonna be like, right? We all know one another very well, and these are two of my favorite people that I have the distinct pleasure of working with, right? Seth Shapiro.
Will rule the day.
Yeah, I already do. Seth on my immediate left here. He's the governor of the Academy of Television.
A governor.
A governor. Sorry. In
Not
my
the
world,
only
you
one.
are the
Thank
governor. He also teaches. We both teach. We're adjunct professors in the USC School of Cinema. You're an author. I'm missing a couple things. So give us kind of like, because we're going to talk about from a Hollywood perspective, right? Which is very different from what Ted was talking about. So give us kind of a snapshot of your background first, and then we'll go over to John, and I'll humiliate you.
I started as a musician as a kid and realized kind of early that music was going to be dominated by technology, so got more interested in technology. And when I was living in New York, there were these older lunatics the other side of the building, and they turned out to be Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons. So I actually watched Def Jam happen. For those of you, it was an amazing, life-changing thing. So like anybody else with, there with any ambition, I started a record label, an indie label in New York. And New York was just not really the place to do new tech. So I moved to LA in January '94, and the first browser came out 3 weeks later. I was actually there seeing Mark Andreessen do the initial roadshow for Mosaic at the time, and sort of became one of the few people in Hollywood at the beginning who could code but had also been a real producer and managed a P&L. So from there, I worked at a lot of companies, Davidson that owned Blizzard, then Disney for a long time, and then I went to DirecTV as number 4 in their advanced television business, and have been a consultant in venture and private equity and new platforms like OTT for a long time, and now, like many of us, just utterly in love with this new platform and trying to participate in any way that I can.
Great. John Canning will insist that he's my boss. It's not true.
I am.
We're both on the board, the New Media Council, on the board of the
I'm the
Producers
chairman.
Guild.
He's not.
He's the chairman. I'm not. Hi, John. In addition to that, you hold a significant position that we can talk about. We're not supposed to necessarily promote that he works at NBC because he's up here on behalf of the Producers Guild, but you're also vice president of interactive technology for NBC Entertainment. You have a career as well. You're also a documentarian, which is interesting and also plays into a lot of the conversation we're going to have today. But tell us a little bit, kind of a brief snippet of your background.
Sure. I often tell people that I have a career wandering, not a career path. I started my life as an electrical engineer, specializing in RF technology, which means my senior project was building an antenna and proving it worked, which, is somewhat esoteric in this day. But funny enough, Seth and I had the same sort of wandering path, which has been touching the creative side and the technology side of our lives and constantly finding ways to bring that back together. Spent many years with Microsoft as a technical evangelist. I like to say I've spent the last 25 years trying to sell Jennifer Aniston's sweater, and I'm still trying, and I'm still insisting that interactive TV will be a thing one day. Through that, I started spending a lot more time also creating, and have been in the field shooting documentaries, publishing from the field, and really finding that medium storytelling as a way to reach people. And so I keep finding myself as I come back into technology, how do we apply that to telling stories that matter and have impact? And then wound myself up at NBC Television because somebody called me and said, hey, what are you doing? But it's been a chance to make large television shows and to work on that cutting edge of how do we impact millions of people, how do we actually let millions of people interact with a television show in a meaningful way and have choice and have that agency, as we talk about. And has also given me the excuse to start working in the VR field as we look at this as yet another toolkit in our storytelling and how we involve and how we bring stories to people.
Great. So Hollywood has this track record. Its past is littered with technology. Most recently, I don't think 3D lived up to what people were expecting. Why? Let's kind of level set here. How is VR going to be different?
I'll go first, and I'll keep it quick. In a certain way, if you look at the evolution of Hollywood as a community, the thing that it's been really amazingly successful at in a certain way is manufacturing reality. I mean, even though we don't necessarily think about it, unconsciously, film and television have become sort of the cultural right touch points. So even though we know those things aren't real, they're the water cooler conversations, they're the characters people refer to. If there's any replacement for mythology and religion in many ways, right? Certainly in the Western world, it's the stuff that we watch. And so, I think part of the thing that's so fascinating about VR is it's a different kind of reality that's not necessarily driven by the vision of a production department. It potentially is driven to some extent by the protagonist, by the viewer who goes into this world and makes sense of it themselves. And I think that in and of itself is unlike any of the other things. So you talk about other technologies like 3D or even different things that have happened online in terms of video distribution. I think this is kind of a discontinuity in that way. This is a game changer.
Well, that was a deeply profound statement. Well,
that's what I do.
That's what he does. That's why he writes. The other thing to look at, and just from a practical business standpoint, is the only thing that was propping up 3D was really the industry itself trying to sell more televisions or get you into theaters. It was that desperate attempt to say, we've got to come up with a new gimmick to get people in. The interesting thing about this, and the problem is that when people talked about VR, and you probably heard it yourselves, is the rhetoric that was used was very similar to the rhetoric around early 3D TV. Oh, it's immersive, it's a better viewing experience, blah, blah, blah. And I would point out to people, I said, well, if you don't change the way you talk about it, if you don't think about a deeper way of looking at it, you're doomed to fall into the same trap. The interesting thing about VR and AR is it's propped up, and the money is actually around development of things that have nothing to do with entertainment. The beauty about this is other industries, which very practically, an architect who really would like to be able to show and move around a building, or a doctor who's doing telepresence, those industries who have sinking tremendous amount of money in the development and the advancement of this are going to bring the entertainment industry along with it. If we were left to our own devices, I think we'd probably kill this thing. But it's true. I think the fact is that it's a diverse set of, gaming. I'll take that away from the Hollywood entertainment for a second, but gaming itself is the thing that was moving this along. But the other industries also are going to move the advancement of the technologies to get to the point that Ted's talking about. There are whole companies that actually don't look at entertainment as the sector for what they're developing. Entertainment certainly is the glitzy part, but I think there's other things that are moving this along that help keep it moving on that keel.
Yeah, if you think about segments like medical training, right? The ability to actually experience and move through a 3D space in VR, or travel, distance learning, military, obviously. All of these things are going to do VR. Absolutely, there's just a complete economic incentive to do it. So whether or not the entertainment business did jump in, it would happen anyway.
So, and by the way, the reason for everybody out here, the reason this conversation is so crucial is, it's really easy because Ted used a phrase that we're all edge cases. Chances are, if you're in this room, you're one of those edge cases, right? Hollywood doesn't think that way. They're risk averse. They need to know that there's a business case for this. So, and you should understand what's driving them rather than getting frustrated, because you can be a part of the solution rather than the problem. What is inside Hollywood driving this? Is it because we've got creatives who are saying, I've got to do this, and because it's Jon Favreau, somebody's going to say, okay, or because they trust Ted? Or is there a real driving force? And by the way, in Hollywood, we're driven by finance, right? So what is the financial equation to all of this? From your perspective, both working at a network, but also, you know, you and I and Seth, we all meet with every network and every studio, so we can kind of generalize as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think look, I mean, the geek in me, the passionate storyteller in me loves this medium. And then I have to put on the hat of a major network, and I have to look at it where we are in this moment in time. And there isn't, you know, we'll talk more about the finances later, but right now it's not about the financial equation. It's more about the gee whiz factor. It's about the noticeable factor. And I talk to producers as, you know, as the guild. We're looking at a lot of this, and producers inherently and storytellers inherently love telling stories, and they love doing new and interesting things. And I've watched more folks go after this because they're just fascinated about it. They want to experiment and play with it. So I see a lot of experimentation. I see the marketing dollars going into this. We've moved from sort of the gee whiz factor, but you still see high-end showcase pieces. You see that, what can we do with this? Lexus loves this, for example. If you look across the number of things that Lexus has sponsored, and I think they do it because it's reaching an audience that they want to associate with. So you look at those dollars in that area. I think it's driven a lot right now by the agencies. You know, let's face it, a digital agency is, what is the cool new thing I can go sell to my client that makes me look hip and progressive as an agency? Sad but true. So the dollars are going there, where they're like, we're going to go make a cool VR thing. The number of times I've gotten pitched by an agency that has a brand that says, we want to make a VR thing, without necessarily understanding what that thing is going to be, but it's just because their brand wants to be cool and hip and progressive. That's what's driving what I see a lot right now. And then on this, like I said, on the other side, the creators are just like, let me go play. There is a toy box here that I want to go dive into.
So it's a great question. How many of you are actually interested or are interested in doing business with Hollywood, you know, or studios and so on? So here's a
I'm so sorry.
Potentially really useful piece of advice. The best answer to your question, although it didn't involve VR at the time, was put to Peter Chernin, who at the time was CEO of Fox and number 2 at News Corp. And his answer was great. He said, effectively, the job of the CEO of one of these companies is to develop new business models faster than the old ones erode. And to the extent that I can do that, you will see me back here next year. And to the extent that I don't, you won't. And so when you put yourself in the mindset of pitching to Hollywood, the higher up the chain you're going, the more you want to really effectively think of yourself as an educator and somebody who's trying to, so in their mind, they need to develop a new thing. If they're smart, you know, if you're pitching to somebody smart, they're trying to figure out a new way to participate in this thing that's on the front page of the newspaper every day. So you want to help them do that. So if your project can help build a bridge from where they are now to where they want to go, and your project can be the thing that will help you do that, then you've potentially got a win. And I think we will see people do that. But you know, when you're working in a system, in an ecosystem or sort of a business structure, you kind of have to figure out what their goals are, and that really is their goal. So from the top, that's why they want to do it.
Yeah, and I'd have to say, I mean, you can also look and separate film and TV. If you look at the classic way that films are put together and the marketing plans for films, it's all front-loaded, right? So big Hollywood blockbusters, it's how do I gain as much attention to our property that is about to launch as possible? What is the cool new thing? What is the sexy? What is the new? That's why you saw a lot of what Fox is doing. They didn't generally release those pieces. It was installations, it was events, it was, oh my God, look at this property. And that works for film. In television, it's slightly different, because in television, there's a lead up to a launch of a project. However, then there's what was the first night's ratings, and is it going to sustain? So the interesting thing is that you come at VR projects slightly differently, in that there may be some around the launch, but if they're really expensive, maybe we save that to see how the ratings are and then do something that is going to be a complementary or sustained. So it's a slightly different equation in that as well, which is where different entities are spending money at different times of the life cycle of a property.
Yeah, like so when you're last one. So when you're considering that pitch to whoever you're pitching to, I would say one of the things you want to consider is if it's connected to IP, to existing IP, existing show or an existing movie, you've got a leg up, right? Pitching a completely new concept is always harder than trying to help monetize something that people already have, right? Logically, a vested interest in doing so. An example with that is television has become more perennial, right? Because it has its first life on a network viewing, and then it moves over to Netflix or Hulu or something, and a show tends to last, if it's good, 5, 7, 8 years. So there's a long period of time in which you can help nurture the value of that IP, bring new people into the show. If we were living in an age before Netflix, right, Breaking Bad never would have been Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad became Breaking Bad because people heard about it. Jesse told me in season 4, and I could go back to season 1 and watch Walter White's journey from the beginning. So as creators, whether this is VR or not, I think one of the outstanding opportunities you have is to look at an existing set of creative and do something that expands the overall experience of that thing. So an example was the Comic-Con thing that happened with Mr. Robot recently. Now, most of the people who watched that are already Mr. Robot fans, but it definitely brought, I would argue, even though it wasn't, super ambitious, it extended the property into a place it hadn't been before. It kind of gave you another view into Elliot's mindset. And so I think things like that are generally strong pitches, and you'll see more VR projects that sort of work with existing IP because it's just an easier economic model to get your head around.
And other than I know we have a number of guys here from EA, and you have a decided advantage in that your user base have gaming machines and processor power and are accustomed to kind of living in these worlds.
And they know how to tell the stories in these worlds.
Yes, very true. Now, a lot of what we're talking about is marketing, right? It's coming out of marketing budgets, which, by the way, I hate, right? Because as easy as a studio will put money into a marketing budget, they will pull it back. And also because we don't have the installed base of people who can actually consume VR right now, it feels a little bit like they're doing cool VR for very few people and hoping to get a really cool press release around it. So in your conversations, is there a path or a progression that we're looking at? Is it 360 then mobile, and then by a certain point we'll have processing power that is basically in a broad marketplace, or how are they thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I come from the school that Ted comes from, and I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic, and I look out there and I'm excited, and then I have to rein myself in and go, wait, where do I work? What's the now? Because we work with organizations that are like, I love the future. That's very important. What do we got to do today? We got to launch a show today. And so, the tough part, we're in this mode, and actually good, that if you think about it, at no point in time I've ever been involved in a technology or an ongoing that worldwide distribution was not a problem, right? You have Facebook doing 360 and YouTube doing 360. That gives me pretty amazing coverage in the world. And so at that fidelity, it's pretty amazing that we can do things. The challenge is that is a 2D 360 world. You can do some interesting things there. Then you move into the mobile interactivity. So we do have to look at sort of that now. The interesting thing is you can experiment and create cool things in that environment. Is it true VR? Is it, stand the criticism of the peers and we pull it apart? Not necessarily. But the reality is the gee whiz factor, the sheer scale you can achieve with those two platforms alone makes marketing people really excited. So you're seeing experimentation in that end, and then you're seeing as we go to higher fidelity and, let's face it, much lower numbers, as we move through the mobile and then into the headsets themselves, the face suckers, then you're seeing sometimes a project that is, on one end is, we'll do a linear version, 2D 360, maybe a minute and a half, and then we'll have a higher fidelity interactive piece. And that's what they did with The Martian. They've released parts for Martian that are the teasers, if you will, out there, and then done the high fidelity for the headsets. And that's what I see going on right now. The mobile, we saw the Google launch today, and the Daydream has been talked a lot about. The mobile era.
I don't think they know what we're talking about. So, so that you all know, as we were sitting here listening to Ted, an announcement came out from Google. Let me just.
This just in.
It literally, right? The headline was, Google promotes VR with new headset and deals with J.K. Rowling and others.
$79.
$79.
So, well, the phone, hold on. Let's just be practical here. The phone is about $699 or $649. It doesn't matter. It's over $600. Google Daydream is Google launching a new version of their OS. Requires new hardware. So all of you that have just gotten Android phones, sorry. And they're releasing an open source face sucker design. So what Samsung Gear, which is that, dock your Samsung phone in that headset, they're doing for the rest of Android ecosystem. You're going to see an Android-led device this year. The rest of the manufacturers are going to follow in 2017. But what they're really, and they have a small, what they call a pickle, but basically a controller. What they're really doing is they're opening up that environment where the HMDs are still going to be the highest fidelity and the best resolution and interactivity. The reality is this is going to service a huge marketplace when you basically enable the mobile environment. So 2017 is where you'll see scale. We're still dabbling now. They announced with Netflix, Hulu, and HBO. The really interesting thing is that's watching a lot of 2D linear video with something attached to your head. I think that's names to get people excited. But let's face it, I much prefer to watch a TV show on my iPad than strap something on my head that makes my head sweat after about 20 minutes. But the thing with the interactivity and the distribution, that's key, right? That's going to be accessible to a much broader scale of people that they can carry it with them. They can do augmented reality right away because you've got cameras built in, two-way cameras and things like that. So powerful announcement.
So your original question was, how do you sell into marketing? The fact that most of these budgets are controlled by marketing.
I would rather get out of marketing. So let's talk about maybe.
Yeah.
Let's broaden the topic a little bit, because I really anytime I see that, marketing is driving something, I'm a little skeptical. But at the same time hopeful, right? Because that can lead to something larger. So let's talk about what's the financial drivers of this, right? Because the hardest part right now that I see is funding content, and I'll give you an example, right? And Google financed some very large projects early on that were, for the mobile phone, and Yum Yum F and Justin Lin did one and stuff like that. These were multi-million-dollar projects. Even if some of that $10 million goes to R&D, you're still talking about $500,000 a minute, right? That is not sustainable in this ecosystem, but that's high production value, right? And then I'm sure we have a lot at the bottom end, and you look at companies that we talk to every day, and Weaver and stuff like that, where they're giving grants and support and things like that. So how do we sustain this fund content when right now we don't really have a revenue model? So who's taking the risks?
Well, so the answer to your first question, in some ways, the answer is your leverage as a seller is greed or profit motive. So all the things I said about
for studios.
But the answer to this question, in some ways, I think it's really effectively leveraging their fear. And I'll give you a really good example of that. So Steve Burke, who's the your overlord and maybe the smartest guy potentially in the media business, was number 2 at Comcast, is now number 1 at NBC, made a statement in 2006, watching Napster in the music business, saying the internet is a freight train. He's on an analyst conference to other TV owners, and he said, we have got to get ahead of this freight train. And that's why NBC and Comcast have done a pretty effective job at monetizing online video or building some of the new projects that got discussed yesterday, because they don't want to be the old guys in a new game dominated by Google and Facebook and Apple and China. And so that's the case here. And so one of the leading indicators of that, I think, is we gave an Emmy last year to First VR Project, which was Fox's Sleepy Hollow experience. And then this year we gave one to Henry with Oculus, which I showed yesterday. And the press coverage was significant. And people know that that's happening. And so if you're in one of these companies, again, and you want to preserve your job, you have to think about where the revenue used to be. I think in a time when the business models are durable and safe, it's easier to be risk averse if you're a marketing VP or a business development VP or a finance person. In this situation, I think Ted had a slide up there. If you're on the track, but you're just sitting there, what happens? I mean, you get run over. So I think there are going to be enough of these projects happening that everybody's going to have to place your bets. And indeed, that's what you see, right? Every major studio has some investment in some VR company, or they will, or they'll be perceived as the old guys who just don't get the future. So even though there isn't necessarily a business model, it's a sunk cost into moving into the next thing that people are going to have to take on.
Yeah, I think if I look at the projects now, there's the marketing dollars, there's the brand dollars, and frankly, we are putting experimental dollars towards it. And I think content creators, we try to say, even though marketing is financing this, how do we actually make the best thing we can? And I know we're trying to take that critical eye, and Ted and I have had this conversation. I like to challenge the notion of, if I could shoot this some other way, we probably shouldn't be doing it in VR. Because trying to get to that holding a high bar that says, let's make the best stuff we can, that leverage the medium for what it is, not just because we can shoot it with a 360 camera. And so that's right now it's leveraging the marketing dollars, as you say. You see the marketing dollars, but how do we make the good experimental things that take us to that next step? And that's what we're, I certainly see organizations trying to move through. I see the conversation in the industry is around that. We're constantly self-critical of the things we make to try to make the better things. And there's there's a lot of great experimentation. This is a good experimentation time right now. So whether it is the marketing dollars or the brand dollars or the experimental dollars, it's doing a lot of work to try to figure out what we are going to do next. The hardware industry, the technology side of it is constantly marching forth, and Ted alluded to that in his conversation. But I think the storytelling aspect is we're constantly trying to march forth. We're moving through does it have to be a 360 camera every time we create a 360 experience? Well, no, not necessarily. It's like keep beating on that and keeping pace with that. So interesting, push forward.
And there's something to be said for keeping at it, and the fact that the first thing you do is probably not going to be that great, and you want to keep going. So quick example, there was a project that I really wanted to see win an interactive media Emmy about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's the Johnny Cash project. Are any of you familiar with the Johnny Cash project from Google Chrome? You should all check it out. It's still live. So essentially, these two guys built this experience where after Johnny Cash passed away, the audience created his last music video. So you actually use the software engine built into the site that came from Google, and you contributed a frame, and then the thing spits you different versions. And if you actually go and look at the people who contributed to it, it's extraordinarily moving. It's this sort of global tribute to this guy and this sort of iconic artist, with comments from people all over the world on what they saw in him. So we couldn't give it an award at that time, so we modified the Emmys, and now we could. And so P.S., the guy who did that is Aaron Koblin, who's now the co-founder of Within, one of the largest VR companies. And you could see in Chris and Aaron's work at the time the trajectory that they were going towards something, and then guess what? The platform showed up, and now they have one of the highest profile companies in the space. So I would say start where you are. If you want to develop this stuff, the fact that technology is not perfect, that's good. Once the technology and the platform are completely mature, that's when there are fewer chairs at the table and it's easier to get shut out. You want to start building with this stuff now. That's how you're going to know when a new technology or a new iteration comes out. You're going to know how to be that one expert who takes that thing to the next level. And I think the smart media companies know it. That's what, people don't generally bet. Smart people don't bet on products. Often they bet on people, the people they want to be in business with, that they think in the future are going to do something amazing. So be those people and start working in this now. And then you'll find something, because there's a lot of room. That's what I think.
So yesterday, for most of you probably weren't here, but we had a keynote from Mark Husvet, who runs a company, he's the founder of a company called Supergravity, right? First kind of digital native studio, predicated on a Hollywood model, but digital native. We're starting to see some of those similar activities now. I think, Weaver might be one of those companies, and there's probably some others as well. Do they have enough power, and we need to talk about financing, and I don't know that we have enough time, but there's an enormous amount of money coming into the
Good
marketplace.
news, at noon we'll talk about financing.
Right. So do they, do they kind of, do these companies come in and prime the pump, and then studios come in and thunk, or are they going to be lean and mean enough that they're going to kind of dominate that role? Just kind of like, what are your prognostications in Hollywood?
Really quick, the difference between, and this is an extraordinary advantage for people who are coming into this story now. The way that it always worked in the past was no matter how much outside investment you got as a filmmaker, or whatever, but primarily a filmmaker because it's a great example, it didn't matter to some extent because you still had to work in the studio system, right, to get your thing distributed fully. So the studio system was effectively a gatekeeper. Mm-hmm. In this instance, they're not. They're not. They would love to be, but they haven't created the mass. So if you can get and so like I think there've been 4 different roadshows of Chinese VR VCs in LA in the last 3 months, actively looking for stuff. Mm-hmm. Extraordinarily nuanced, extraordinarily knowledgeable, knowing what they want and what they don't want, and very precisely what kind of people they do and don't want to work with. And so, I mean, there's the ability for this kind of stuff to bypass that kind of gatekeeper, and so I think that's really good, and it's on people's side.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a bubble moment. It's a tech, it's like you've seen the tech startups. It is the moment where the folks are the Weavers in the world. They're building and they're iterating their production companies. You're seeing traditional production companies latching on to new shooting methods to make themselves relevant. You see studios, look, they hire production companies, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there is internal production, but for the most part, they're going out and they're hiring production companies. Somebody asked me, hey, are you guys over there like making your own VR? I'm like, what are you, high? Like, why we don't have a bunch of people to go train or, grab the cameras. We're talking to 10, 12 companies out there that are all making stuff because that's what we do as a larger organization. You're hiring those production companies, you're bringing them in, you're doing it. So I think it's a great opportunity. There's going to be shakeout. Look, every production company I've run into is like suddenly a VR house. And I'm like, that's going to be interesting. But they're all making that race to stand out, to be seen as, experts in that.
Yeah, and real quick, just if you think, just to show how upside down the whole thing is in a good way, the most interesting media partnership, I would argue, by far, so far in VR has not been a Disney partnership or a Warner Brothers partnership. It's been with the damn New York Times, mm-hmm. right? With the over 1 million cardboard shipped and all that great within content. People's grandmothers started watching Walking New York and got interested in that. I mean, who would have predicted that, the Gray Lady would have been so? But that's how much interest there is in that stuff, and that's all of that sort of represents the number of channels that you have to get it out, in addition to the big 6.
It also represents, if you look at the medium, frankly, them doing even low fidelity 360 videos makes sense, right? It's in the moment. It's reporting. It's, nobody has ever given a war correspondent a hard time because their video was herky-jerky. It's like, wow, you're there. So what's great for them is they can really take advantage of that right now. I mean, you can do documentaries and you don't have to necessarily have the super high fidelity, and because you're telling something that's important. And so what's fascinating for me is outside of entertainment, you're seeing folks going, this is a good, useful medium for us. Let's go use it.
So, and we'll end with this, and then Amy will tell me we don't have any more time. Music industry.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, right. Caught with their pants down. iTunes now controls distribution. They're not necessarily happy because it's all in one place, right? Studios in Hollywood, not happy about Netflix owning the kind of streaming space. We don't really see Hollywood having any distribution in place now for VR. Are they learning any lessons from the past? Are they thinking about this? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? Or is somebody new going to come in and be the next, the Netflix, if you will? And I know a lot of people are trying to be this, the Netflix of VR. And where are we with distribution? What's Hollywood's thoughts on it?
Well, I think, if you look at, and again, if you're talking a film studio versus a the TV channels, right? The TV programmers. Almost everyone in the TV business is sorting out their distribution, right? There is no, wait, we got to get on digital. I can, whether it's a large broadcaster or a cable company, they've got their direct to consumer, they've got, they're distributing in all the OTT platforms. Like, that's proliferating and happening without a problem.
No, not without a problem. ABC is just now launching theirs, right? Warner Brothers just now.
The third version of it, right? Like, I mean, they're all like, it's not something.
Don't question me.
Okay, fine. I thought we could get into it. I mean, you do have a Hulu, which is owned by the, the majors. So they've all been taking whacks at this digital distribution. And right now we are seeing, you saw companies that came out and said, we're the 360 of YouTube. And we're like, well, wait, YouTube has done the 360 of YouTube. You're seeing some of those folks trying to grab early distribution, be center points for, John can't figure out whether they're a content company or a distribution company. They want to aggregate content. They want to be into that business. But to Seth's point, where you don't have to rely on the studios for distribution, the good news is the studios don't have to rely on somebody else for distribution either, right? So whether it's Disney going out with their movie channel or something, they can go stand up their own distribution channels. So that's the kind of giant horse race, is who's aggregating it, where are you seeing it?
I worked with, I think I talked to you about this once, but I worked for Universal a while ago. Everybody remember Blu-ray had this technology called BD Live? Anyway, BD Live was really cool because what it allowed you to do was to buy a fixed media product like a DVD, a Blu-ray, and you'd put it in, and we had the ability to download content. Neil Young actually did this extraordinary product around this, which is still online, where basically he put out this own chronology of all his stuff, and then over time he dynamically added more stuff from his own personal collection, like tickets and other performances and tape-recorded conversations that he had made over the years. So the idea was that this definitive Neil Young experience, you would buy this Blu-ray product, and then it would be added to over time. It was fantastic. So long story short, I worked with one of the studios on it, and it fell apart because the studios wouldn't share single sign-in, so somebody would have to have a Warner Brothers and a Sony and a Disney account for all of it. This could be like that, right? A lot of times it's easier for somebody to aggregate, to your exact point. The reason Apple wound up killing that is because in the iTunes iPod arena is because Sony Music and Sony Electronics refused to cooperate. So they basically gave the opportunity to Apple. That's why Jobs got it. So I would expect that sort of curation aggregation thing is going to come from a third party, not from the studios.
One question? Any? Then we're going to wrap it up. Guys.
There's one.
Oh, okay.
Finally, somebody.
Jesus.
Is this dying, coming to a theater and sharing this collective experience? Are we all moving towards eventually putting on these headsets?
It's going to change. So I think at least half of the studios are experimenting with new forms of immersive entertainment or VR-like experiences that will happen theatrically. They can charge more for them. There's stuff you can't get at home, so it's not something that you can get on your big screen TV. There's a couple. I don't know that any of them have been formally announced, but there's a bunch of. To Ted's, great metaphor about theme parks. There will be more theme park-like, and as a matter of fact, in China, this is kind of interesting, maybe a way to close out. We don't have this here. There are a couple people, we have friends that are working on this. There's no, we've all had this issue. You might want to go watch VR, but where do you do it, right? If you don't have a headset, where do you go? Well, in China, there are already over 1,000 arcades in malls where you can go watch different VR experiences. This one's $5, this one's $3, this is $7. It's just growing like wildfire. You'll have to see some version of that come to America, and some of it will be high-end theatrical experiences.
I mean, Ted alluded to the other side of his life, working with Barco, Dolby Atmos. They're continually, folks, building bigger, better, more immersive group experiences, right? Like the was it 4D theaters, and they're constantly iterating on that. Is it going to completely go away? No. There's constantly pushing that edge of that. But I'm also curious about those domed experiences, those experiences where you don't have to put something on your head to have that just all around me amazing experience. And you see that iteration going on. So it's just, it's just like when the cell phone came out. Did it eliminate the television? No. Just gave us yet another way, or the iPad just gave us yet another screen to look at it that fit the convenience of the moment that you wanted to do. It's the diversification of it to me.
And I think, don't quote me on the number, but I think by 2017 you're going to see about 1,700 180-degree theaters, so screens that are 180 degrees. Certainly in North America was what I'd heard. So, I mean, that's a kind of an iteration of the experience as well.
Ted, was it 30 Barco Experience theaters?
Into multiplexes all around. So we did 10 for the 2 Maze Runner movies first as an experiment, and then we just did the Star Trek Beyond movie it played a bunch in Canada at Cineplexes too. There were in Toronto and Edmonton and a couple other places where they had their theaters. But it's like a wraparound cinema. It's 3 screens and content's created specifically for it. It's an interesting part of the world. It's very often referred to as bricks and mortar VR.
Yep.
It's like, let's go to a physical place and feel something that is beyond just a single screen in front of us. And it's exploratory, just like all this stuff that we're doing, but it starts to be working and it seems to be catching on, so there's more coming.
Yeah, the installation base, just the fact, if you look at entertainment centers like the Void, where there's a whole lot more stuff involved, there's atmospherics, there's haptics, which is the force feedback, all of those things where you may not necessarily buy that for your home, but just make the experience that much more.
Seats that move,
yeah.
A lot of that, yeah. We got to wrap it up. Find us, find Ted afterwards. Love to continue the conversation.
But if we don't wrap it up, she's going to be angry.
Blame Amy, because right now I'm I'm not on your side. Guys, thank you very, very much. Love this.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.